Okay, so I'm just wanting to give you some basic hand drawing skills, and I'm wanting to describe the different views that we do for hand drawing and the different terminology used. So here is a quite complicated building. It's got several stories, 5 stories. It's got a basement and it's on piled foundations. So this is a structure. This is actually the structure you're going to end up drawing in Revit. This is just an example. This is in a piece of software called Fusion, and once you've created your 3D models you can put them into Fusion and you can just look at like this. This is on an iPad, you can also do it on a phone, and then you could actually mark them up. So for instance you could mark up comments if you needed to. So if I scroll round, let me just undo those and start to go away from this and go back to out of the marking mode. So see there's a little square at the top here saying back. So if we went to the top view, if we scroll this around and did a top view, it gives you a little menu. You can press top. So top is a view from directly above, sometimes called bird's eye or sometimes called plan. So very often we call this a plan, and we look at it and we say this is what it looks like from above. We very often also then put a north sign on, and then we use north, east, south and west elevations rather than doing front, back, left, because that can be ambiguous. So if I go back to this, you can imagine that the top, and if I go to the front, that would then be the south view or the south elevation. Now this software is quite nice. It actually gives a bit of perspective. So if I'll show you how to do perspective later, but all these columns here are kind of moving slightly away in this direction, and then here those columns are in a line and then they're going back in this direction and this direction. That's called perspective. It's what the eye sees. But when we're doing a plan, they would all, a section, an elevation, would normally just have them all in a row, so we wouldn't show this feature. We would just say it as if we were looking square on. So these would all be in line, and these would all be in line, and these would be all in line. So let me give you an example of drawing a sketch of the house to the Revit exercise that you did. So if I go into another piece of software, I use a piece of software on my iPad called Notability. It's just a sketching piece of software. I can put squared paper on and use this quite easily. So I'll just get a pen, choose my colour. If I hold on and wait, it'll do a straight line. So obviously not when I'm doing this video, but I'll just do it again. So if I do this to here, I get a straight line, and then to here. So whenever I'm doing a drawing, I like to give myself a border, because without a border your drawings can look a bit scruffy. And then you need to have some kind of area where you're going to put notes or comments and information about the drawing, so maybe give yourself a couple of lines at the bottom. So I'm going to do a plan in this top left hand corner. So the plan is a view from the top, and the dimensions of this house were 5, so I'm going to do 5 squares. Now I'm not going to hold and get them perfectly square, because I want people to get used to actually doing something which is a bit more freehand. So this is 9 this way, 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, back here and back here. So the house from above that you drew on Revit and you could look around would look like this, and then it's got a ridge, so it would have a ridge like this. However, it's got a hip at one end, and you'd have found out that a hip doesn't look like that. So you would actually move some of this, and you would have a line coming up at 45 degrees, crossing there, and crossing here, joining there, and coming back. So that's what the hipped roof would look like from above. Now, if this was squared paper, normally these squares would be 5 millimeters apart, and we know that 5 millimeters equals 1 meter, which equals 1000 millimeters. So we're drawing to scale. So 1 millimeter equals a fifth of this, or a fifth of this, which is 200 millimeters. So every meter I draw on this, or millimeter or inch or anything, would be 200 times bigger in the scale. So we call this a scale of 1 to 200. So I would put this on the bottom, I would put scale 1 to 200, and then people could use this. Get rid of my workings there, and we wouldn't have this referring to 5 millimeters, so we'd just always have a scale. You would also put notes on your drawing, so you'd always have some notes, and strangely you'd always put do not scale. So you draw them to scale, but you'd always put do not scale, because you don't want someone to get a I'll just show you the highlighter. You don't want someone to measure this here with a ruler and then build it to that if you've made a little error on the drawing. So you really ought to add dimensions rather than relying on people scaling. But to draw it to scale, it means it looks correct. So that's why we draw it to scale, but put do not scale. So underneath here, you would put the title, plan, and then you could put 1 to 200, which would be known as the scale if you're going to have different scales on your page. If everything's to scale 1 to 200, then you might not have to bother with the scale. So if the scales change, put scales on each drawing. If the scales don't, then you don't need to. In which case, just from a nice perspective, you put the plan in the middle rather than having it at the side. So I'll forget the chimneys and so on for now. I'll let you work out how they're going to look. That's a plan. So if we're now remembering we're going to put a north sign on, now tradition is that north is up for plans. So you'd put a little arrow there and put N for north, and people would know that was north. They'd then know this was the north edge, the east edge, the south edge, and the west edge. So I'm now going to draw a south elevation. Now if I draw the south elevation, it's an elevation looking this way. And if I draw it underneath, I'll just do what I'm doing in my mind in red. So construction lines could go down here to establish where I'm going to draw it, and it must be the same size. I don't want to draw it here because that wouldn't be sensible and it wouldn't line up. So let's get the things lined up and say, okay, so I'm going to draw the bottom line here. If I've done those lines, I can do it the same length, that's 9 meters long. If I looked at the height of the building, it said it was 6 meters to the eaves, so that's to there. So the eaves was the edge of the roof. So that's the first block done that you'd see, and then you'd see the roof. Now the roof, the width was 5, so it goes up at 45 degrees, so it'd be 2.5. So the top of the roof, or the ridge, would be here, and it would look like that. But again, there's a hip happening here, so the hip would come like this. I'm just showing you how to construct it in my mind, and then you could delete that blue line, red line, and that red line, which is your construction line, and then just bring it across like that. So this would be the south elevation. And what I'd like you to do, again, this arrow here can go because it's been labelled. What I'd like you to do is a view this way, call it the east elevation, and a view this way, call it the west elevation. And I'd like you to draw them here, so you could draw east elevation here, west elevation here, and you'd end up with 2. Again, if you draw them at this, then your construction lines would be that this height would be the same, and this would be the floor plan the same, and then you can then look at this and say it's going to be 5 wide, the same as here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So one's going to fit there, just planning your drawing out, and then one's going to fit 5 here. So you kind of got a drawing in this space and a drawing in this space. This is just kind of to use your drawing. If you wanted to do another elevation, you'd probably need another sheet. You could end up doing what we'd call an isometric, and a little isometric in this space here, but in that case the scale would have to change because you wouldn't be able to fit an isometric in that space. That's a really quick introduction, but it's the kind of speed that we want you to be doing these sketches at, because we're much more interested in the output. Something that's nice and neat, that's fair enough, and using a pen or a digital system can be better, but pencil and paper is fine. What you end up doing then, just to give you, I'll do it relatively scuffily, but you then put on dimensions so that someone can do this. So this would be 5,000, and then this one would be 9,000. And again, you need to work out whether you're using arrows or whether you're using tags, and then you want to make sure you aren't going past things like your words and overlapping. Obviously this south, east, west can all be tidied up. This was just for telling you how to do things. Okay, have a go at that, and then what I'd like you to do is to either screen capture or take a photo or scan in your drawing and post it up on the mole so we can have a look. Thanks.